Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously gripping legal battle that tested the absolute limits of labor rights and procedural rules. We're looking at a recent Supreme Court decision, one that actually started in a restaurant kitchen way out in the South Pacific and ended up completely redefining what it really means to quit a job. If you've ever felt trapped in a toxic, hostile workplace, well, you're going to want to pay close attention to how the law looks at an employee's breaking point.
Okay, picture this. Imagine you're standing in a kitchen in the Cook Islands, thousands of miles away from your home in the Philippines. Out of nowhere, your boss's mother points a literal knife right at your face and screams, "You go home or I kill you." Sounds crazy, right? Like something out of a movie script. But no, that was the horrifying real-life reality for an overseas Filipino worker named Melba Danusta back on September 4th, 2019.
So this brings us to a really crucial question, and it's right at the heart of today's case. If you beg your boss to send you home because someone just threatened you with a knife, does the legal system look at that and say, "Oh yeah, you voluntarily resigned"? Like, can an employer actually claim you simply chose to walk away, getting them off the hook for paying out your contract, when you were quite literally fleeing for your life?
Let's rewind just a bit to May 2019 and see how all of this built up. It starts with Melba's initial agreement. She signed a 2-year contract to be a kitchen hand for a place called the Lunchbox Limited in Rotoranga. This was all processed by local and foreign recruitment agencies. And like a lot of overseas workers, she made this massive leap of faith based on a specific set of legally binding promises. But as we're about to see, what was on paper and what actually happened were just worlds apart.
Right from the jump, the breach of contract was absolutely stark. On paper, Melba was legally promised $400 a week for 8-hour shifts, plus free, suitable housing. Sounds okay, right? Well, her reality was a totally different story. Her hours were forcibly slashed down to 6 a day, which dropped her pay to $300. And that promised free housing? Yeah, totally a mirage. She actually had to pay for her own housing out of her already reduced paycheck.
So, when the whole nightmare finally culminated in that terrifying knife threat, Melba understandably demanded to be released. She returned to the Philippines and immediately sued for illegal dismissal. But what followed was this grueling, drawn-out legal ping-pong match bouncing between completely different levels of the justice system. It really goes to show that simply having the facts on your side, that's really only half the battle.
The momentum shifts in this case are just wild. It started out strong with an initial validating victory at the labor arbiter in early 2021. But then, just a few months later, things took a sharp turn. The National Labor Relations Commission dealt her a devastating loss, incredibly ruling that she, quote-unquote, voluntarily resigned. I mean, wow. It got even worse in 2022 when the Court of Appeals threw her case out entirely on a super strict procedural technicality, completely ignoring the facts of the actual abuse. It literally took until January 2024 for the Supreme Court to finally step in and sort this mess out.
Now that technicality at the Court of Appeals is super fascinating. They dismissed Melba's petition simply because she asked for a 15-day extension beyond the strict 60-day deadline to appeal. And why was she late? Well, she blamed the severe COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns that were entirely paralyzing movement and shutting down government offices in late 2021. So the big question the Supreme Court had to answer was this: should a literal global pandemic allow for a temporary pause in the rigid wheels of justice?
Well, the Supreme Court's answer was pretty definitive. Yes, the 60-day rule is normally set in stone and non-extendable. But the court explicitly ruled that the late 2021 COVID-19 surges and those intense government lockdowns, those absolutely constituted a special, compelling circumstance. They essentially told the lower court, hey, you really should have focused on the actual merits of this heavily disputed case instead of rigidly hiding behind a technicality during a global health crisis.
Okay, so with that massive procedural hurdle finally cleared out of the way, the Supreme Court could actually tackle the substantive, emotional core of Melba's ordeal. They had to look at the facts and determine, if you begged to leave an abusive job, did you actually resign or were you effectively fired? To answer that, we have to look at a legal concept that is absolutely vital for any worker, or employer for that matter, to deeply understand.
The Supreme Court officially ruled that Melba was a victim of constructive dismissal. So what is that exactly? Well, it occurs when someone quits or stops working because continuing their employment has become impossible, unreasonable, or unlikely. Think of it as an illegal dismissal wearing a disguise. It happens when an employer's actions make the workplace so incredibly unbearable that a reasonable person would feel absolutely forced to give up their job. Technically, yes, you quit, but the eyes of the law see it differently. The law says your employer fired you.
And the absolute crucial point here is that Melba didn't just wake up one Tuesday and casually decide to quit. No,
She was forced out, step by excruciating step. Step 1, the diminution of her pay and hours. That's a clear-cut breach of contract right there. Step 2, the inhumane treatment, enduring vicious verbal insults, being called stupid and idiot by the employer's mother. And finally, Step 3, an intolerable environment that climaxed with a literal weapon pointed at her face. I mean, any one of these is bad enough on its own, but combined, they create a totally impossible situation.
The Supreme Court forcibly pointed out that this scenario is the very essence of a dismissal in disguise. You see, the recruitment agencies actually tried to use Melba's desperate plea to escape that hostile environment as a legal shield. They tried to argue, hey, she voluntarily resigned because she asked to be released. But the court, they saw right through it. They firmly established that you cannot terrorize an employee into leaving and then just turn around and claim they broke their contract. It doesn't work like that.
So, let's talk about the aftermath. What does a Supreme Court victory for an abused overseas worker actually look like in concrete financial terms? Because when a court finds an employer guilty of constructive dismissal, they don't just hand out a little slap on the wrist or a stern warning. They enforce real financial restitution to make that worker whole again. Let's break down exactly what she got.
First up, because Melba was illegally dismissed a mere 4 months into her 2-year stint, the court awarded her 20 months of her unexpired salary. And here's a really important detail. This was ordered to be paid in the Philippine peso equivalent of her original full New Zealand dollar rate. That ensures she gets the exact value she was originally promised before all those illegal pay cuts even started.
Furthermore, the court ordered the full reimbursement of her 90,000 Filipino peso placement fee. You know what's crazy? The recruitment agency had actually tried to strong-arm her into signing an acknowledgement receipt for a measly 5,500 pesos as a partial refund right before she left. But she bravely refused to sign it, knowing she'd seek full reimbursement later. And man, that refusal paid off big time, because the court recognized the full 90,000 amount she was rightfully owed.
The court didn't stop there. They also awarded her 50,000 pesos in moral damages. By doing this, they were formally recognizing the terrifying abuse, the bad faith, and the profound social humiliation she had to endure, specifically that horrific knife threat. It's a legal validation of the severe anxiety and trauma inflicted upon her while she was trapped in a completely foreign country.
And to top it off, they tacked on an additional 25,000 pesos in exemplary damages. Now, the purpose of this specific award isn't really just to compensate Melba. It's strictly designed by the court to serve as a harsh deterrent. It's a way of saying, do not do this to prevent such wanton, oppressive, and malevolent actions by other employers in the future. It sends a loud and clear message. Abusive behavior carries a very strict financial penalty.
Of course, as anyone in law will tell you, winning a judgment is one thing, but actually collecting the money, that's a whole different ballgame. So to make sure Melba actually sees these funds, the court applied the principle of joint and several liability. In plain English, this means the local recruitment agency, its foreign principal, K&G Manpower Services, and the agency's president are all held equally responsible for the entire amount. So if the foreign employer just vanishes into thin air, these local and foreign agencies are completely on the hook for every single penny.
The story of Melba's case leaves us with a really provocative final thought to chew on. Think about it. The Court of Appeals almost let a terribly abusive employer completely off the hook, all because of a 15-day filing delay during a global pandemic. While legal procedures and strict deadlines are absolutely necessary to keep the justice system running smoothly, we have to ask ourselves, must the law always remain flexible and human-centric enough to see the knife hiding right behind a forced resignation letter? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into constructive dismissal, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.